My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought keeping the peace was the exact same thing as showing love. I thought if I just absorbed enough of the shockwaves, if I just stayed quiet and fixed the problems behind the scenes, the rest of my family could live quietly. That was until a Tuesday afternoon when I walked into my own kitchen holding a bag of groceries and saw the wooden memory box my son had built for his late father sitting at the bottom of the trash can. It wasn't just tossed in accidentally, it had been wedged underneath a pile of empty wine bottles and greasy takeout containers. The edges, which my 7-year-old Leo had sanded by hand until his little fingers blistered, were stained with leftover salsa. The brass latch was bent. Beside the trash can, my younger sister Chloe was scrolling through her phone, casually sipping a diet soda. She had moved into my apartment 3 days earlier because she was between phases, which was family code for being broke and unwilling to work. I didn't yell. I didn't drop the groceries. I set the bags on the counter and asked her what happened. Chloe didn't even look up from her screen. "Oh, that old thing?" she sighed. "I'm having some friends over for drinks tonight, and it was just sitting on the coffee table looking like a middle school shop project. It ruined the vibe. Besides, Leo needs to move on. We all do." My mother, who had come over to help Chloe prepare for her little gathering, was wiping down the sink. She froze, the sponge hovering over the porcelain. But she didn't correct Chloe. She didn't gasp. She just looked at me with that familiar, pleading expression she had weaponized for 20 years, the look that silently begged me not to make a scene. Before I tell you what I found in my inbox the next morning, and exactly how I let Chloe's perfect facade crumble into pieces, tell me where you are watching this from. What time is it for you right now? How is the weather? I always love knowing how far these stories travel. And if you've ever had to protect your child from your own family, you'll understand exactly why I did what I did next. For most people, a wooden box is just a box. But for Leo, that uneven, splintery piece of pine was the only place he felt safe putting the few things he had left of his dad. A watch that didn't tick, a pocket knife, a faded photograph. He had spent 3 weeks making it in his grandfather's garage, bringing it to me every night to ask if I thought the hinges were straight. I had saved up to buy him the little brass latch. That box wasn't just wood. It was grief, handled as carefully as a 7-year-old boy knew how. That was why seeing it under empty wine bottles changed something fundamental inside me. It wasn't just the cruelty of the act. It was the casualness of it. It was the way Chloe acted like she had done us a favor by clearing out our pain to make room for her party. I walked over to the trash can, reached into the garbage, and pulled the box out. My hands were shaking, but I grabbed a paper towel and slowly wiped the salsa off the lid. "Sarah, come on," my mother said softly, stepping in front of Chloe. "Don't make a big deal out of nothing. She's just trying to make the place look nice for her friends. You know how stressed she's been lately?" That was the family rule. Chloe's stress was an emergency. My stability was a given. When we were kids, if Chloe maxed out a credit card, she was figuring herself out. If I asked for help with college tuition, I was adding to the burden. When my husband passed away and I had to raise Leo alone while working full-time as an accountant, my mother told me how proud she was of my independence. What she meant was, she was relieved she didn't have to help me, because all her energy was reserved for catching Chloe every time she fell. I looked at my mother, then at my sister. "The gathering is canceled," I said. Chloe finally put her phone down. She blinked at me, her mouth hanging open in a half scoff. "Excuse me? I already invited them." "Then uninvite them," I said, my voice eerily steady. "And you have until Friday to find a new place to stay." My mother gasped, dropping the sponge into the sink. "Sarah, she's your sister. You can't put her on the street over a piece of scrap wood." "It's my son's," I said. "And she is not sleeping in this house anymore." I took the box and walked down the hall to Leo's room. He was sitting on his bed, reading a comic book. He didn't know yet. I hid the box behind my back, kissed his forehead, and told him I loved him. But as I closed his door, the cold reality settled in my chest. I had spent my entire life shielding Chloe from the consequences of her actions, and in return, she had treated my son's heartbreak like clutter. Chloe didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. She slammed doors, loudly complained on the phone to her new wealthy boyfriend about how toxic and controlling her sister was, and aggressively packed her bags, swearing she was moving into a luxury high-rise by the weekend anyway. I ignored her. I washed the wooden box, dried it, and put it back on Leo's shelf while he slept. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat at my laptop to catch up on some accounting work before getting Leo ready for school. I opened my email. Mixed in with the usual spam and client invoices was a message from Crown Estates, a premier property management company in the city. The subject line read, "Confirmation of guarantor approval. Lease agreement number 8842. I frowned. I hadn't applied for an apartment. I certainly hadn't co-signed for one. I clicked on the email. Dear Sarah Miller, we are pleased to inform you that your financial profile has been verified and you are officially approved as the financial guarantor for Chloe Miller's upcoming lease at the Pinnacle Building. Attached is the final digitally executed contract. The tenant is scheduled for key pickup tomorrow at 10 a.m. The air completely left my lungs. My vision actually blurred for a second. I clicked on the PDF attachment. There, on page 14 of the lease agreement, under the section detailing liability for a $4,500 a month luxury apartment, was my name, my social security number, my bank account details, and a digital signature that looked almost exactly like the one I used on my tax documents. I sat frozen in the quiet of my kitchen, the blue light of the screen illuminating the absolute depth of my sister's betrayal. A year ago, I had helped Chloe consolidate some credit card debt. She had begged me for my financial statements to prove to a creditor she had family backing. I had given her copies of my files because she was my sister, and she was crying. She hadn't just used my credit score. She had stolen my financial identity to secure a luxury apartment she couldn't afford. She had assumed that once the ink was dry, I would be too afraid of the legal fallout and too conditioned by our mother's pressure to back out. She assumed I would just pay the rent when she inevitably defaulted, rather than ruin my own pristine credit. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Chloe. Mom says you're being unreasonable. Just calm down. And don't try to ruin my move-in tomorrow. I really need this fresh start. I looked at the text. I looked at the forged signature on the screen. And I looked down the hall toward the room where my son was sleeping, his repaired wooden box sitting safely on his shelf. I didn't reply to Chloe. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Crown Estates. I dialed the number at the bottom of the Crown Estates email. The phone rang 3 times before a leasing manager named Mr. Vance answered. He sounded upbeat, the kind of professional cheerfulness reserved for people moving into buildings with marble lobbies and rooftop pools. Yes, Ms. Miller, he said after I gave him my name. We have everything squared away for your sister. Key handover is scheduled for 10 tomorrow morning. I didn't yell. I didn't demand an explanation. I stared at the wooden box on Leo's shelf through the open doorway and spoke with a voice so hollow it didn't even sound like my own. Mr. Vance, I am calling to inform you that I did not sign that guarantor agreement. The digital signature on your file is a forgery. I do not authorize the use of my financial profile, and I am formally withdrawing my name from this lease, effective immediately. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. The professional cheerfulness vanished, replaced by the sharp, careful tone of a man realizing he was holding a massive legal liability. He shuffled some papers. Ms. Miller, if you withdraw as the guarantor, your sister's application defaults. Given her current credit score, our corporate policy requires either a qualified cosigner or a cashier's check for 6 months of rent upfront. That's $15,000, due at the time of key pickup tomorrow. Then I suggest you let her know, I said. I asked him for his direct email address. Within 10 minutes, I sent a formal statement denying authorization, attaching a copy of my police report for identity theft, which I had filed online while we were speaking, and samples of my actual signature. I didn't do it to be vindictive. I did it because after years of cleaning up Chloe's messes, I knew exactly how fast she could spin a lie to make herself the victim. I needed everything in black and white. 45 minutes later, my phone started vibrating off the kitchen table. First, it was Chloe, 6 missed calls in a row. Then, the text messages started pouring in. What did you do? The leasing office just called me. They're threatening to cancel the lease. Call me right now. I flipped my phone face down. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. This time it was my mother. I answered on the second ring. Sarah, what is going on? Her voice was breathless, panicked. Chloe is hyperventilating. She says you called her building and sabotaged her apartment? I didn't sabotage anything, I said calmly. I removed my name from a legally binding document I never signed. She forged my signature, Mom. She committed fraud. My mother let out a frustrated sigh, the exact same sigh she used when I was a teenager asking for quiet time to study while Chloe was throwing a tantrum. Oh, Sarah, don't use ugly words like fraud. It's a formality. She just needed a little boost on paper. You know she's dating Julian now, that wealthy guy from the country club. She has an image to maintain. She was going to pay the rent herself. She just needed your credit score to get through the door. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. The coldness in my chest spread to my throat. You knew, I whispered. My mother hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. She mentioned she might use your old financial statements as a reference. She backpedaled quickly. I didn't know she actually signed your name, but Sarah, if you pull out now, she loses the apartment. Julian is supposed to help her move in tomorrow. If he finds out she's broke, he'll leave her. Just call the building back. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You won't have to pay a dime, I promise. There it was, the family rule operating perfectly. Chloe's desire to pretend she was wealthy to impress a man was treated as a necessity. My financial security, my ability to provide for my son, was treated as a bargaining chip. Mom, I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. Yesterday, Chloe threw my son's memory of his dead father into the garbage because it ruined her vibe. Today, you want me to risk federal fraud charges so she doesn't get embarrassed in front of a guy she's known for 3 weeks. It's just a signature, my mother cried, her voice cracking. Why do you always have to be so difficult? Because if I'm easy, you two will take everything I have, I said. Then, I hung up. Before I tell you what happened the next morning in the marble lobby of Crown Estates, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a family member who believed your boundaries were just suggestions? Someone who thought your success was a communal fund they could dip into whenever they wanted? If you have, you know that the hardest part isn't the initial betrayal. The hardest part is the silence that follows when you finally stop playing their game. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room listening to the hum of the refrigerator, preparing myself for what I had to do. With someone like Chloe, a phone call wasn't enough. And if I wasn't there in person, she would find a way to manipulate Mr. Vance. She would cry. She would invent a story about a family feud. She would try to push the keys into her purse and promise the money was on a wire transfer. I wasn't going to let that happen. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to stay behind the scenes and smooth the tablecloth over the crack in the wood. I was going to stand in the room and watch the crack split wide open. The next morning, I dropped Leo off at school. I wore a tailored black blazer, the one I usually reserved for high-stakes audits. I made sure my posture was perfect. I drove to the downtown leasing office of Crown Estates, parked my car, and walked through the heavy glass doors at exactly 9:45 a.m. I was 15 minutes early, but Chloe, desperate and panicked, was already there. The lobby of Crown Estates smelled like expensive leather and fresh lilies. It was the kind of place designed to make you feel important, provided your bank account matched the decor. When I walked in, the scene was already unfolding exactly as I had predicted. Chloe was standing at the sleek marble front desk. She was wearing a designer trench coat I knew she couldn't afford, her hair perfectly blown out, performing a frantic, whispered negotiation with Mr. Vance. Beside her, looking slightly bored and checking his expensive watch, was Julian. He was everything my mother had described: polished, wealthy, and completely unaware of who he was actually dating. My mother was there too. She sat on a velvet sofa near the window, clutching her purse like it was a life preserver. The moment she saw me, her face drained of color. She stood up, her mouth opening to say something, but I didn't even look at her. I walked straight toward the desk. "Sarah!" Chloe hissed, her eyes widening in a mixture of fury and terror as I approached. She quickly stepped sideways, trying to block Julian from hearing. "What are you doing here? I told you on the phone, I'm handling it." "You're not handling anything, Chloe," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet lobby. I didn't lower my volume. I didn't play the family game of whispering to hide our shame. Julian looked up from his phone, frowning. "Is everything okay, babe? Who is this?" Chloe let out a high, artificial laugh. "Oh, Julian, this is just my older sister, Sarah. She's my accountant. She just dropped by to bring some extra paperwork. It's a bank error, really." Mr. Vance, who had been staring at his computer screen with a tight, uncomfortable expression, finally looked up. He recognized my voice immediately. "Ms. Miller," he said, nodding at me. He held up a thick manila folder. "I received your police report and the sworn affidavit regarding the forged signature. I've already forwarded it to our legal department. As of this morning, your name has been completely expunged from this lease application." Julian's frown deepened. He looked from me to Mr. Vance and then down at Chloe. "Forged signature? Chloe, what is he talking about? I thought you said the wire transfer for your deposit was just delayed. The panic in Chloe's eyes was absolute. The meticulously crafted illusion of the independent, wealthy socialite was cracking right down the middle, and she had no glue left to hold it together. She turned to me, her voice trembling, dropping the polished accent she usually used around Julian. "Sarah, please," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. It was the same, weaponized crying she had used since childhood. "Don't do this to me, not right now. I'll pay you back, I promise. Just tell him it was a misunderstanding so I can get the keys." I stood there, looking at my sister. I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing my own peace to maintain hers. I thought about the overtime hours I worked to build the credit score she had tried to steal in 30 seconds. And then, I thought about a salsa-stained wooden box lying at the bottom of a trash can. "There is no misunderstanding," I said, turning to Mr. Vance. "To be absolutely clear for your records, I did not sign that document. I will not be assuming financial responsibility for this unit. If she wants the keys, she needs to meet your standard requirements." Mr. Vance nodded efficiently. He looked at Chloe, his professional cheerfulness completely gone. "Ms. Miller, as I explained on the phone, without a qualified guarantor, corporate policy requires 6 months of rent up front. That is $15,000. We can accept a cashier's check or a wire transfer, but we cannot release the keys until the funds clear." Chloe's mouth opened and closed. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide, silent tears spilling over her eyelashes. She was waiting for him to do what the men in her life always did: step in, pull out a credit card, and save the day. Julian stared at her. He didn't reach for his wallet. He looked at the tears, looked at my cold expression, and then looked at my mother, who was silently weeping on the velvet sofa. He was wealthy, but he wasn't stupid. He recognized a sinking ship when he saw one. "15,000? Julian asked softly. He took a step back, physically distancing himself from her. "Chloe, you told me your trust fund covered your housing for the year." The silence that followed was suffocating. The word trust fund hung in the air like a bad joke. My mother let out a small, horrified gasp. Chloe had not only lied to him about her wealth, she had invented a trust fund to explain why she never seemed to work. "Julian, baby, I can explain," Chloe stammered, reaching for his arm. He pulled away gently but firmly. "I think I need to go," he said. He didn't yell. He didn't cause a scene. He just turned around, walked out the heavy glass doors, and got into his waiting car. Chloe stood frozen at the marble desk, staring at the empty space where her perfect new life was supposed to begin. The keys to the luxury apartment sat on Mr. Vance's desk less than 2 feet away, but they might as well have been on the moon. My mother rushed over, grabbing Chloe's shoulders. "Oh, my poor baby," she cried, glaring at me with a ferocity that actually surprised me. "Are you happy now, Sarah? You ruined her life. You humiliated her over a stupid piece of wood." I didn't flinch. I looked at the two of them, the golden child and the enabler, standing together in the lobby of a building they had no right to be in, brought down by their own entitlement. "I didn't humiliate her, Mom," I said, my voice echoing slightly off the marble floors. "The truth humiliated her. I just stopped hiding it." Mr. Vance quietly picked up the keys and placed them back inside his drawer. "I will be canceling the application," he said softly. I didn't stay to watch Chloe cry. I didn't stay to listen to my mother's excuses. I turned around and walked out into the bright morning sunlight. My hands were shaking slightly, but my chest felt lighter than it had in 20 years. The drive home from Crown Estates was the quietest 30 minutes of my life. My phone didn't ring. No passive-aggressive voicemails. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the family machine had broken down completely, and I wasn't the one rushing in with a toolbox to fix it. I later learned from a cousin that Chloe's move-in day had turned into a complete disaster. Without my signature, and without the $15,000 deposit, the leasing office formally rejected her. Julian blocked her number by noon. With her bags already packed and nowhere to go, she had to move back into my mother's cramped 2-bedroom apartment. The illusion was over. 3 days passed before my mother finally called me. I almost didn't answer, but a part of me needed to know if she was calling to apologize or to perform. When I picked up, her voice was heavy, dripping with the kind of manufactured exhaustion she used to make people feel sorry for her. "Sarah," she sighed. "Chloe hasn't come out of her childhood bedroom in 3 days. She's devastated. I hope you're satisfied. I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the sunlight hitting the trees. I'm not satisfied, Mom. I'm just done. You broke this family, she whispered, her voice trembling with accusation. Over what? A piece of scrap wood. You let your own sister be humiliated over a box. I closed my eyes. The old instinct to soften, to explain, to apologize for making them uncomfortable, flared up in my chest. But then I remembered the salsa stains on the wood. I remembered the forged signature on the legal document. It wasn't just a box, Mom, I said, my voice steady and cold. And it wasn't just a signature. Both of those things belonged to someone else. You and Chloe just never believed you had to respect anything that was mine. You protected the version of her you wanted, and you expected me to absorb the damage. I'm just not paying the bill anymore. She didn't have an argument for that. For the first time, she had no magic sentence that could turn Chloe's consequences into my obligation. I ended the call before she could try to find one. That Saturday morning, the apartment felt different. It didn't feel like a waiting room for someone else's drama. It felt like a home. I made pancakes, the kind Leo liked, with chocolate chips unevenly scattered in the batter. When I walked into his room to call him for breakfast, he was sitting on the floor. The wooden memory box was in his lap. He had polished the brass latch with a tissue, and he was carefully placing his dad's old, broken watch back inside. He looked up at me, his large brown eyes serious and quiet. Mom, he asked softly, is Aunt Chloe coming back? I sat down on the floor next to him, crossing my legs. I didn't treat him like a baby who couldn't understand. Kids always know when the air in a house changes. No, sweetie, I said, putting my arm around his small shoulders. She's not coming back. Our house is just for us now. He thought about it for a second, tracing the edge of the box. Is she mad at us because I left my box on the table? My heart cracked just a little, realizing that he had been secretly carrying the guilt for a storm he didn't create. I pulled him closer and kissed the top of his head. No, baby, I said firmly. She is mad because I told her she is not allowed to treat our things or our hearts like garbage. From now on, only people who are kind get to walk through our front door. Leo nodded, seemingly satisfied with the new rule of the house. He closed the brass latch with a soft click, placed the box safely on his highest shelf, and ran to the kitchen for pancakes. People have asked me since if I feel guilty for not covering for Chloe. The honest answer is complicated. I grieved the sister I used to defend. I grieved the mother I used to excuse. I grieved the version of myself who believed that love meant endlessly rescuing people who would happily watch me drown. But guilt? No. Guilt belongs to people who betray their values. That morning in the leasing office, I honored mine. Chloe's biggest mistake wasn't just throwing away the box, though that was cruel enough. Her biggest mistake was assuming the woman who had spent her whole life holding the family together would keep doing it after she hurt her child. She thought I would be too afraid of being blamed, too conditioned by loyalty, too desperate for their approval. She forgot that motherhood can completely change the shape of your courage. I might have tolerated the disrespect when it was only aimed at me. But when she aimed it at Leo, she introduced herself to a version of me she had never met. And she didn't survive the encounter. When someone throws away your joy, you do not climb into the trash to prove to them it had value. You walk away, you protect your peace, and you let them explain to the world why they thought they had the right to break you. So let me ask you, have you ever had to close the door on a family member to protect your own peace? Did you ever have a moment where you finally realized that walking away was the only way to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise you, if you are standing in that quiet space after the storm, you are not alone.